Welcome everyone, here with a quick breakdown of the trailer that just recently dropped. I did have another animation breakdown planned for today. I was literally just about to begin editing the audio when this one dropped, but anyway, let's get straight to it. So the first scene begins off with the red ribbon guys in the car, surprisingly, although instead of fading the cut out like the first trailer after the driver touches the figurine or whatever this is, it shows a bit more of the cut, and also brings up some already seen animation again with the next two cuts. Nothing noteworthy to point out here. In the next cut though, we get our first bit of proper new animation. The character acting is pretty basic, although I really like the explosions, the contrast with the lighter values to the darker backgrounds, as well as the warm colours placed against the more cooler tones for the clouds, stands out really nice. Next you have a brief cut of the red ribbon guy who seems to be in a lab going off the background. The arc to the movement is a little basic, and the movement itself does feel a bit rigid with how the arm and body sort of move as one rather than separate objects. With Gamma 1, although this is an incredibly short cut, the movements feel especially jerky, but to the next one you get sort of an extended cut of when Piccolo is attacked, with what seems to be eyes on this energy ball. Quite odd, and I'm guessing it then splits apart. Regardless, the circus of beams is interesting and the timing is well done. There's also a good sense of scale displayed through the storyboard. The explosions themselves look great, the general colour palette as well throughout the scene is really nice. Then moving on to some newer stuff, with the dust clouds, they especially float quite naturally with a lot of great shapes. Now the composition of Piccolo in particular I really liked, with the clouds surrounding him and the long shot of him in the centre looks quite imposing and cool. Of course the gesture isn't that out there, and if I was to nitpick, they seem to have just used a basic standing pose, as his feet aren't pointing down like they usually do when characters float in the air. Even still, for me, it still looked quite striking. In the medium close-up at first glance, I remember I quite liked it actually, but taking a second look at it, the pupils are quite off in proportion to each other. I don't mind the rest of the model though. The next part, however, is my favourite bit of animation from this trailer, as Gamma 2 twirls his pistol around and flicks it into his holster. And I think that's in part to the hand poses themselves. Unlike the sort of uniform look you can get with 3D models like we saw earlier, here they feel natural with all these various bends. There are also other little effects like the speed lines which do sort of give it a 2D animated feel. The arcs and timing are also quite good. I also like the brief but sort of goofy character acting with the Sailor Moon pose he takes. For me personally, it's stuff like this that can kinda make me fall in love with the character. The arm movement is also really nice. He doesn't just move his arm straight down, he slightly twists his hands inwards, with that leading the motion, and then there's a small bit of drag with the index finger as it comes down. The next cut though did leave me a little mixed when I first watched the trailer. The movement looks somewhat rigid, but on second glance it looks okay. Although what did stand out to me is the direction and storyboard once again. The general composition of like Gamma 1 right in the center, with the rest of the red ribbon arc guys around him, the dark rainy backdrop giving quite a cold and sinister atmosphere, with then a building with bright coloured glass in the center as well, drawing your attention to the main focal point, again being Gamma 1, and finally the naturally imposing look you get with the low angle shot all comes together very nicely. And I do wonder for myself if this will sort of be the theme, where it's more so the storyboard, effects work and compositing that stands out to me in the final film. I hope not, but at least it looks fairly solid so far. The next cut though jumps to quite a different tone with some rather comic action, and like quite literally with very vibrant coloured backgrounds and massive lettering to the sound effects. Definitely starting to understand the theme of pop the producers were describing. Now with the comic sound effects, it's definitely interesting to see them make a return. From memory, don't want this to come off like an absolute fact, but I do remember noticing them a fair bit in the original Dragon Ball series. Like for example when Bulma would use a capsule, and several other times with them sort of later fading away in Z. There are still appearances in Z, like the baseball scene with Yamcha, but again, going off memory, it's something you don't see in modern Dragon Ball, and perhaps even before that for some time. So yeah, kinda cool. I'll also point out that it's interesting that the movement is very limited here. It's just a hold on the key pose, which makes me lean to this being just a silly comedic scene. Or then again, perhaps maybe Gamma 1 and 2 say they're heroes or something, and Piccolo kind of scoffs at the idea, and maybe points out that heroes wouldn't attack for no reason, and they both try to prove that they are and pull out some silly superhero-esque moves to display, with the fighting then getting more serious later on. Of course, that's just a guess. Now again, several more reused cuts. I remember as well when watching the first trailer with the scene of Goku flicking back while he's fighting Broly immediately stood out and felt like a video game cutscene. Looking back, I don't mind it so much now, but even so, that video game cutscene feel is something I really hope will be minimal in the final movie. But then we get to the big reveal of Gohan. Seeing him in Piccolo's gi with the poster that dropped the other day was certainly a surprise, but I honestly completely forgot about the cape. Definitely a little nostalgic, and it's a pretty cool entrance. Again, instantly you get a more serious tone with the rain and the dark color palette, the way in which he just instantly flicks up the soldiers without even moving, then the dramatic close-up to the face with the water droplets floating upwards definitely grabs your attention. The timing though, as the soldiers fall down, is really off. You have the two in the back begin to fall first, but then the ones in the front begin to drop, while the pose is held on the others in the back, with them then dropping while the ones in the front stay still, and then the same process again. So when in motion, there's this very jarring look to the fall. Moving on with the next one of Gohan, there's a really great shot from the back with a rather dynamic pose with some nice foreshortening, with Gohan then clashing with Gamma 1. Again, the framing is quite good. Thereafter, there's that beautiful shot of Goku from the first trailer, but then with an addition of Vegeta, which gives us our first look at his CG model. Nothing really glaring or overly noteworthy to point out. It looks fine, although one small nitpick. It would have been cool if the shading was made more pronounced like with Goku. And the line work for his neck muscles is for whatever reason a very thin width in comparison to the rest. I'm unsure why, but it isn't a big deal at all. Anyway, we then get the same shots of Piccolo. The facial expressions and especially the eyes and eyebrows do feel a bit static. However, the next shot of Pan is quite appealing with a dynamic pose of her launching at the camera. Then again, two more dramatic shots of Gohan, this time with a bit of aerial combat. With Gamma 2, there's multiple levels of anticipation behind the kick, certainly giving the action flair, but most importantly, impact. The animator also breaks the model a fair bit with regards to the right leg to give a more powerful hit. The following poses are also very strong and dynamic, love the directional energy through them. Then, Gamma 1 challenges Gohan with him powering up to a Super Saiyan, and what immediately caught my eye when Gohan transformed was how the color palette for the skin tones felt like something straight out of Z, with the general art style in this frame just feeling like something out of the Buu arc as well. Although I guess it should be expected, as while I was writing this, it turns out Jakashi Kubota is a character designer after all, which I find so crazy because I remember back in May with a Shintani video I did, towards the end I was sort of dreaming how if Shintani didn't handle the character designs, I would love Kubota to, but I never thought that would actually happen. But anyway, getting back to it, if you're familiar with his work in DBS Broly, it was very Buu arc-esque. So it's not surprising that you have that flavor scattered throughout some shots now. And I'm quite interested to see how much that will translate over into the final film. Anyway, with the final cut, Gohan powers up with some really intense impact frames, with one in particular feeling hand-drawn, which is interesting. The aura effects do look great as well. However, one criticism I've heard, and I certainly don't disagree with, is that it feels more like a video game power-up, and I definitely can see why. For me personally, with the camera angle, then the zoom out, it does remind me of an animation from Dragon Ball FighterZ. There's also some jerky movement. I believe it's down to having two separate cuts placed after the other. As you can see the background shift between this frame and then this one. You also have very wide spacing, and so as a result it gives this very jerky look. At the same time, it's possible this is just one cut, with the sudden wide spacing being simply due to cutting frames to make the sequence shorter. Although it makes the sudden change in background all the more odd, which is why I'm leaning to the latter. But after that, the trailer then ends. So, in closing, I've definitely started to get used to the idea of this being 3D, and I guess if I was to sort of wrap my thoughts up of everything shown so far in a statement, it would be probably with a comment I saw on the video I did discussing the whole move to 3D, and it was something along the lines of that even though this is a 3D film, it doesn't actually feel like they're taking advantage of what the medium has to offer. And to build off that, there isn't anything significant animation-wise throughout this and the last trailer that couldn't be achieved in 2D. Now, of course, we haven't seen the film. Perhaps there will be some mind-blowing scene with a lot of complex camera angles, but just generally animation-wise, there hasn't been anything that out there yet. It's also surprising that there is still some rather rough work scattered throughout. I guess the next trailer though will be a good indication of what we can expect. Coming closer to release, I'm guessing to increase the hype, they'll want to show off Broly and no doubt more fights, which will naturally be more complex animation-wise. So I'm definitely interested to see that. But yeah, with that final note, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.